Good evening and welcome to the City of Pasco Council Workshop Meeting. The council thanks you for being part of our city government. At workshop meetings, the council discusses issues, but no formal action is taken. The agenda packet is available on the City of Pasco website at www.pasco-wa.gov/agenda. Please note that the city council meetings continue to be held remotely and may be accessed through GoToWebinar. This meeting is being also televised live on Pasco TV, channel 191, on the Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and also streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel. This and previous council meeting videos is available on the city's website. Through proclamation number 20-28, Governor Inslee extended the directive making temporary changes to Open Public Meeting Act. These virtual meetings will continue until the OPMA restrictions are lifted. And lastly, the public may submit their comments and/or questions for items not on the agenda by contacting the city manager or city clerk or using the feedback form on the city's website. And once again, I just want to be consistent. I do want to give kudos to everybody in the Tri-Cities and in Pasco. I pretty much see everybody using their masks. Appreciate it. It's helping. There is a concern that we might have a spike or an increase in our positive counts because the numbers were plateauing, but let's continue to fight the fight and do what we can to avoid the spread, and that is wearing our mask. And again, I appreciate everybody for doing so and being vigilant to maintain their distance and keeping us safe. So with that, can we have a roll call, please?
Council members Alvarado,
Present.
Maloney,
Present.
Milne,
Present.
Roach,
Present.
Serrano,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Barajas,
Present.
and Mayor Martinez.
Present. Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. May we please rise with me for the flag salute, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that, and we'll go to item number 4, verbal reports from council members. Does anybody have anything to report tonight from the council?
Yes, Mayor, this is Councilman Milne, and I did attend the Parks and Rec on Thursday, and we did talk about the different parks that will be coming online next year, such as the Chapel Hill. I guess it's going out for bid next month, and looking forward to the spring of next year and also the soccer fields. And then also another thing, I had some trespassers on my property, and I just want to give thank you to Officer Buckley and Officer Mendoza for their professionalism and the way they handled the situation. And I was really impressed, and I stood by them when they were talking to the individuals, and just a real big thank you for their good work in our city.
Thank you, Councilmember Milne. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
It's Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Just two things to briefly report on. First, I was invited to talk with the MyTri 2030, I think, Quality of Life Council, and about the history of public facility districts, and specifically with the Pasco Public Facility District project, and kind of wanted to get an idea of what's going on with that, where it is in the stages of things. And I wish I could have provided better news than the PFD isn't really being able to accomplish much due to COVID, but nonetheless, it's something that Pasco continues to be moving forward on, and hopefully the Pasco PFD will be able to provide a good recommendation once we have a little more certainty, both in our sales tax forecast in the future, as well as the actual ability for us to, really has a community campaign for this, or try to get an understanding of, making sure the voters understand what the facts are about something like a water park. Second, and I'll jump off of a little bit of what Councilmember Milne said there. There was an incident in front of my house where actually, where I wasn't involved at all, but unfortunately someone who was trying to evade police was tackled into my driveway. So that was little bit of a startle for my daughter and then the neighbors. Incidentally, we ended up with like 6 police cars in front of my house. The guy wasn't that dangerous. We just happened to have a captain nearby, a sergeant nearby, and a number of trainees. So we ended up with quite the force out there. But anyways, other than the gentleman, doing some, definitely trying to both evade and resist arrest, it went, I think pretty well. And I also watched and saw as they talked with him and tried to make sure that he was not going to be able to hurt anybody. So anyway, the police were professional. They did a good job. It's unfortunate that it ended up quite that way. The gentleman apparently did have some warrants out for his arrest. So unfortunately, there was a bit of a history there as well. So anyways, that's all I had to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Anybody else today?
This is Councilmember Roach.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Zara.
Thank you,
Councilmember Roach, go
everyone.
ahead.
I just wanted to say last week I got to participate in a promotional video that Visit Tri-Cities is making about its contributions to local business here. And so I know we have Michael Novakovic from Visit Tri-Cities tonight, so that's pretty apt. But there was also present Jennifer Cunnington of STCU. So got to, once again, just good timing, got to say thank you for that $10,000 check that we received from STCU in person. So just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. Was that, who else wanted to address themselves? Oh, Councilmember
Councilmember
Alvarado, go
Alvarado.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, I guess I'll start with piggybacking off my colleagues here with kudos to our police department with a specific thank you to Officer Aparicio. As everyone knows, he's super active in the community. And, we made in our neighborhood, we made a parade for one of our neighbors who had a brand new baby. There's a lot of history with this neighbor. I won't get into that, but definitely a neighbor who has some special needs in his family. And Officer Aparicio has gone out of his way to build a relationship with this specific person. And it was just good to see him show up and be part of this parade, kind of a drive-through baby shower, so to speak. And so, I probably can't go into the details of it, but, anyone who would know that the efforts to build this relationship would know that, he's definitely, him and other officers who have done a great job in just building this relationship with folks with special needs in our community. And then I also want to report that I attended the Benton Franklin Transit. We had a long board because we had a budget meeting, special meeting, and then we had a regular meeting. But I guess more than anything, just to inform the board, the council here that we have approved the 2021 budget for Benton Franklin Transit. And generally, obviously ridership's down and trends are going up, but Benton Franklin's in good shape, has good healthy reserves, and will continue serving our community into the future with a healthy financial backing. So, nothing to be worried about in the Franklin Transit.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Anybody else?
Yes, this is Councilwoman Mayor Pro Tem Barajas. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Councilmember Alvarado said in regards to Officer Aparicio. I'm not sure if Chief is on, but wanted to mention that Officer Aparicio was actually nominated by the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as Public Servant of the Year, which will be celebrated on the 20th. Thank you, Aparicio, and thank you so much, Chief Broski, for your work and for inspiring your employees to continue doing their best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Barajas. And anyone else? If not, I would just like to just say I also attended 3 separate meetings on Friday, from the COOP meeting to a meeting with potential legislators, and then the Hotel Tax Advisory Committee that I attended. And again, I just want to remind our community that our council is very active, and there's a long list of committees that each and every one of them are assigned to attend, and appreciate their time and their service to represent our city and be an advocate for all our community members. So council, thank you very much for all the time you put in. I appreciate that very much. And not to mention being available for everyone in their districts to answer any questions and provide the assistance that they can provide. So thank you for that. We'll move right along to items for discussion tonight. Tonight we have a tourism promotional area update and 2021 budget and marketing plan. Who wants to start off?
So if I could, Mayor, I'll kick it off. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So tonight, we do have with us Michael Novakovich. He's the president, CEO of Visit Tri-Cities. And just a brief background. So the TPA is formed in partnership between City of Pasco, Richland, and Kennewick. And it assesses a fee, a per night, room night assessment on hotels and motels in the Tri-Cities. That money comes back, it goes to the state, comes back to the cities, and then funds tourism efforts, particularly related to hotel, motel marketing through Visit Tri-Cities. And so Mr. Novakovich is here tonight, talk to us a little bit about the 2021 budget. And we all know Mr. Novakovich, he actually needs no introduction. He has his own. So with that, I'll turn it over to him.
I would say he's one of the most famous guys in the Tri-Cities, Mr. Novakovich. And he's a fellow drummer of mine, so.
That's right.
Good evening.
Good evening. I enjoy this council. Well, Mayor Martinez and council, thank you so much for hosting me this evening, allowing me to present the Tri-City Regional Hotel Motel Commission Marketing Plan. Dave teed it up really well. In fact, Dave said, Michael, if you could give a less than succinct report and give long rambling narratives, council would appreciate it, so would I. So I'm going to do my best. If we could advance the slide. Thank you. So as Dave mentioned, we have the tourism promotion area. It's a $2 per room night assessment. We're going to be talking about the activities that are funded by that, our marketing activities, bringing all these wonderful visitors here to the Tri-Cities. In normal times, now it's as safely as possible. We have a proposed TPA increase, which I'll be talking about, and then our budget that includes that increase. If you wouldn't mind advancing that slide. So a number of different activities are funded by tourism promotion assessment. We'll go into some of these details as we talk about meetings and conventions and sports and leisure travel and the different activities that we fund, that we produce with these funds. And next slide, if you would. Thank you. So we have 6 hotel motel commissioners. We have 2 for each of the cities that fund TPA or oversee it. We have Monica Hammerberg and Vijay Patel that represent the city of Pasco, both longtime commissioners and outstanding folks. You could move to the next slide for me. And how we develop this. So every year we survey all of the hoteliers that pay into TPA to get their understanding of, one, what kind of a job are we doing? Are we meeting the needs? And they continually tell us that we are, which is great news. But also, if there are specific activities they'd like to see us engaged in, are there key markets that we should be pursuing? We take all that information, or we provide that back to our hotel commissioners, review it, create a report, bring it back. They have unanimously approved that plan, which we deliver to the cities by the 1st, and then host these presentations to talk about the details of those plans. Next slide, if you would. Thank you. So what I'd like to do, we're not going to go through every number here. I'll highlight a few things, but I did want to give you a state of the industry just to kind of paint a picture of where tourism is at. And as you might imagine, at the front end of this pandemic, tourism was adversely impacted, and very, very quickly so, as people stopped moving around. They stopped getting on planes. In fact, we had a stay-at-home, stay safe order, so significant downturn. And with that, we have people that come and typically would stay in our hotels, spend money doing that, go out into our community, of course, enjoy our restaurants, purchase from our retail, take in our attractions, pump gas, buy groceries. All of that activity generates about $500 million worth of visitor spending here in the Tri-Cities, which helps small businesses not only survive but thrive. It also generates a significant amount of tax revenue, about $55 million, which helps fund things like police and fire and schools and teachers and roads and parks. It also supports close to 6,000 jobs in our community. So pretty significant driver. In the state, it's the fourth largest industry, 24.1 billion with the B dollars in economic activity, and it supports about 183,000 jobs. Well, as I mentioned, we saw a significant downturn when the pandemic hit. If you look at that top graph, this is a national picture. And if you go down to that green line that says ADR, that's average daily rate. If you go to the center column, that's a typo. That should actually be a negative number. And what that tells us is, if we could find a hotel room for $100, which would be a pretty darn good deal, what those hoteliers were actually receiving was 21.4% less. So they were getting $78.60 on a $100 hotel room. Right below that, that negative 50.6 is a significant number. That RevPAR is revenue per available room. That's what our hoteliers are actually seeing, about 50% less revenue than they did during normal times. If you go down to that next graph, that's what we refer to as our competitive set. That's here in Washington State, communities that we compete for visitation on different levels, whether it's sports, meetings, convention, or leisure. If you go down to the green bar, that's the Tri-Cities, and over to the far right, you can see our RevPAR over the prior years down about 45%. So pretty much in line with what we're seeing here across the nation. Industry analysts are expecting our industry to be down about 45% on hold this year. Our revenues at Visit Tri-Cities, we're looking at about a 40% reduction. When we look at the types of travelers that are out there, business travel is big business. And if you talk to Buck Tapp, the airport director there in Pasco, he would tell you that is the business of the Tri-Cities airport, yet they're not seeing those types of travelers. They're pretty much non-existent. They have seen some leisure, which is good news. Business travelers, confirmed business travelers, only about a third of them are expected to get out and travel for business in the next 6 months, which is not fantastic news. Meetings and conventions and sports, a slow return, unfortunately, with what we refer to as group business, those types of activities. In part, we can't currently host meetings and conventions, and we can't field sports teams. Those athletes are ready to play, but in this current environment, we haven't been able to put them on the field. So to date, we've canceled about $30 million worth of business in 2020 for meetings, conventions, and sports here in the Tri-Cities. When we look at leisure travel, this is where we expect to see a return of travel. It's the return of the road trip. 2 in 5 individuals stated they are willing to travel up to 300 miles for an experience, which is fantastic news. That's one way. When you look at where the Tri-Cities is positioned, we're right in the swing zone of Seattle, Spokane, Portland, and Boise, and those leisure travelers are looking for wide open spaces, and we've got a lot of them, and we've got this extended season here. So good opportunities for the Tri-Cities as it relates to recovery via the leisure traveler. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these details in a moment. But what I did want to point out was that small graph to the right that says number of available hotel rooms. So if you look at that, over the last 5 years, we've had about a 14% increase in the number of hotel rooms available in our community. The challenge for us is we don't have any new demand generators. There's not an amusement park that's opened up. We don't have a public market that's, brewing there in Pasco, which is super exciting. We don't have expanded convention space. We don't have expanded sports infrastructure. So we've got this growing number of hotel rooms, and it takes a lot of marketing to fill those hotel rooms. In the meantime, when we look at our competitive set, Yakima and Spokane being our most significant competitors, 2 years ago, Spokane reinvested in sports infrastructure. They're currently building out a massive sports complex, and they reinvested in their meeting space. Yakima, their city council approved the expansion of their convention center. This spring, they'll have an additional 18,500 square feet to the convention center. And council also approved an 80,000 square foot indoor sporting arena at the Sozo complex. So our competitors just got more competitive. Well, that brought about a discussion earlier this year about increasing TPA. So this is pre-COVID. We were looking at this growing hotel inventory and our competitors, and we knew we needed more marketing horsepower if we were going to fill hotel rooms and drive economic impact. And so here we find ourselves in this pandemic, and we revisited that conversation, and our counterparts across the state did the same thing. So Spokane currently is pursuing a $2 increase to their TPA, taking it to $4. Vancouver's pursuing $2. Yakima originally had floated an idea to their council, and I didn't know how hard they were pursuing it. I had a colleague that works closely with my counterpart in Yakima that said they may consider $2, pursuing $2. Wenatchee and Snohomish are each increasing their TPAs by $1. Those are significant sports competitors. What our hoteliers came together with, our commissioners, was that $1 was appropriate for our community. We presented that to the area hoteliers that that feed into TPA, had a great discussion with all of them. We have a balloting process to move this initiative forward where we need at least a 60% vote. I'm happy to tell you that we still have ballots coming in and we've exceeded the threshold in all 3 of the cities that pay into it. So we are well positioned to present to you an increase in TPA to help us better fund our marketing activities as we work to climb out of this COVID environment, at least the adverse impacts related to it. If you could advance that slide again for me. Thank you. So meetings and conventions. One of the things that we do as it relates to meeting and conventions is we travel and go to trade shows. Matter of fact, we partner with our city partners to attend some of these events. When we go to trade shows or we travel, we actually have preset meetings with these decision makers that are qualified to bring business here to the Tri-Cities. So anywhere from 10 to 30 appointments, we bring that business back. We have other marketing activities we do use to attract this type of business. As I mentioned, the expectation is this is going to be a slow return for several reasons. We're going to stay in the game. We're going to continue to foster those relationships and work to bring this business back because it's great business for the Tri-Cities. But when these meetings and conventions planners look at their delegations, there may be reduced budgets for travel. A lot of these associations have been deferring membership, so their resources aren't nearly as strong as they once were. And hybrid meetings are taking place. So much like this council meeting here where we're doing this virtually, a lot of these meetings are expected to have an in-person component, but they'll have fewer delegates as many tune in via a live stream. I will tell you though, that does provide us with some opportunity. Some of these meetings and conventions that might have been held in a Spokane or Seattle because they needed larger convention space, they now may be small enough, the in-person attendees, that we can attract them. So there's some hope there. If you could advance to the next slide. Thank you. So sporting events. So one of the things that we do in sports is, of course, we go out to the trade shows and we travel and meet with these decision makers, much like meetings and conventions. Very successful as we work to bring business here to the Tri-Cities. Again, pre-qualified decision makers, and these are preset appointments. But we also use what are called bid fees. So if you look at that, over on the left, you'll see bid fees, and the third item down, Ironman. We've been working with the tournament directors to bring an Ironman event here to the Tri-Cities, which is exciting. I hope to have some additional news for you, and hopefully not the too distant future. But some of these events require what are called bid fees. If we win the event, they take these fees and help offset their cost to host, but we get a much higher return in terms of economic impact when we bring these larger events to our community. And if you could advance the slide again, please. Thank you. So tourism development, this is where the bulk of our additional dollars from that dollar increase that we're proposing will go. So we did put extra money into bid fees for sports, but it's here where we do our traditional marketing tactics. So this is everything from broadcast media buys, so think television, to some print. We don't do a lot of print anymore, a lot of digital. So whether it's social media advertising, digital display, retargeting, geofencing tactics, pre-roll like videos on YouTube, for instance, this happens here where we can better target individuals, but it takes a lot of marketing resources. So when we look at meetings and conventions in sports, we have, it's personal selling. We have one-on-one relationships. With this type of advertising, we have to go into markets. We go in mass with targeted strategies, but we have to always be on. So it's that sales funnel where we're creating interest and awareness, and we need to be there as people start to make a buying decision, and then definitely when they're booking to be successful. And if you could advance the slide again for me. Thank you. I'm just going to go over the top graph in the far right corner. This is a funding comparative. This was created before I had heard that Yakima was actually pursuing a $2 increase, which I haven't confirmed. That was a conversation that I had on Friday. But if you look at Spokane, for instance, their typical budget, or up to this point, had been about $5 million. Their increase will take them to $7 million. Yakima, if we were doing a $2 budget, Yakima actually has a slightly larger budget than ours, which is a challenge for us. They have slightly more money, half the hotel rooms, and they've got greater demand generators. So this $1 additional really helps us out in terms of marketing and being competitive in that space. It'll be interesting to see what their council passes and what they do as a community. And with that, if you could advance it one more time.
I have a question for you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
But just wondering, with the increase, is it likely to adversely impact somebody who's selecting Tri-Cities for a hotel accommodation?
Such a great question. So when we're looking at, I'll take a leisure traveler. So if they're coming to our community, the purchasing decision, if we've got a level playing field across the street, in some cases, we may actually be more affordable. As other communities take $2, some of them dollars, it's leveled it out. But when we look at that family that's traveling, and I think back to when I was a little guy at grade school, my sister's 2 years younger than me. When mom and dad would take us on road trips, they'd grab a room with 2 king beds. They'd throw my sister and I one bed. Of course, we'd hug opposite ends of the beds, close to falling off, couldn't be any further away from each other. Mom and dad are on the other side of the room. If we stayed someplace for a week, if that were to happen in the Tri-Cities, we're talking about a $7 increase for the individual visitor, so pretty negligible. And again, it's a level playing field across the state for the most part. For us though, Visit Tri-Cities, the increase is a little over $500,000 to our budget, which is going to be needed if we hold steady with the $2 TPA funding that we currently have. Our budget over our 2019 budget, over our 2020 budget is going to be down in TPA only about $400,000. And we're going to see a downturn in lodging tax too, as those stays have been greatly reduced. So this will probably put us somewhere around budget neutral as to where we came into this year, which actually positions us well next year as we work to rebuild the tourism economy. But thank you, Councilmember Roach. Happy to answer any questions anyone else might have.
Anyone else? All right.
Did I suck the air out of the room?
Well, not.
This is Councilmember Maloney. I was on mute.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So my question, Mr. Novakovic, is when we're looking at fiscal year 21 or calendar year 21 and beyond, there's a lot of varying projections as to when the tourism industry may pick back up. It's a pretty complex layout. I know you don't have a crystal ball, so could you just kind of share with us kind of what the assumptions in your model are?
Sure. So
yeah.
What we're seeing, great question, Councilmember Maloney. So industry analysts are telling us that full recovery to our best year ever, which was 2019, isn't expected until 2023. So it's going to be a pretty long climb out of where we're currently at. The good news is those same analysts are predicting that by the fourth quarter of this next year, the end of third quarter and by fourth quarter, they're expecting us to be back to 75% of where we were at in 2019. So we'll have pretty decent recovery this next year. There's pent up demand for travel. People are itching to get out and about. We see it now as people are starting to move around. I think with sports, the return of that piece of group business, I do think we're going to see that rebound. I'm really hopeful we'll be in a good place with the community that we can bring that back. I don't think we're going to see it nearly as strong out of our meetings and conventions as I mentioned. The piece that's going to be concerning in here, and again, we do have opportunity with leisure, is going to be that business traveler. And it's very, very hard to measure and understand if we have if companies are going to be funding that type of travel, if they figured out that a lot of this work doesn't need to be on site and rather happens via Zoom or WebEx or whatever it might be. But we took that 75 number to answer your question, that 75%, and that's what we build our budget upon.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And that, by the way, that would be for our consolidated budget when we're looking at all our funding sources.
Okay. Well, appreciate that presentation, Mr. Novakovic. Anybody else? Well, we'll be looking forward to, there'll be something coming to the council.
Yes, and not sure if we're ready for the next meeting, next regular meeting or the one after, but
Okay.
yeah, very shortly.
All right, well, Mr. Novakovich, thank you very much for that presentation, and looking forward to continue working and looking for success in bringing more people in and filling our hotels. And we appreciate what you and your staff are doing, and understand it's been hard for everybody, but again, thank you very much.
Oh, Mayor, appreciate the time. We always appreciate the support of the city of Pasco. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, well, with that, we'll move right along into our next item, and that would be an ordinance, preliminary plat timeline extension. And we will have, Mr. White? Mr. White, would you like to
Yes.
get us filled in on that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. This item involves a proposed code amendment to our subdivision ordinance and regulations. Currently, our regulations, of course, reflect identical language in state law that allows a preliminary plat to have a final plat 5 years after its approval. So the final plat involves constructing the roads, constructing the utilities, doing all the work necessary to make it ready for sale. It also could include bonding rather than actual construction, although that's somewhat rare, but not unheard of. At any rate, each plat has 5 years from preliminary plat approval to accomplish this. State law also allows cities and counties to create a process for an extension. And staff has forwarded a proposed code amendment to the Planning Commission. It took place at the Planning Commission meeting in September that would establish a 1-year extension through administrative action for filing a final plat. As noted in the agenda report, the extension could contain additional or revised conditions of approval should there be an appropriate reason to do that after review of the extension request. And any dispute or request for further extensions would involve action by the City of Pasco hearing examiner. So in short, the proposed code amendment would involve the possibility of including a 1-year extension through administrative action. And as noted again in the agenda report, this may be particularly important in the northwest portions of the proposed at this time Pasco urban growth area expansion, where the provisions of utilities and infrastructure may be somewhat complicated due to simply the amount of area necessary for those to occur in and the difficult process of coordinating those extensions within the 5-year time period for preliminary plat approval. So with that, Mr. Mayor, and again, I just did want to note the Planning Commission considered this in September and has forwarded a recommendation to City Council.
Thank you, Mr. White. Appreciate that preliminary presentation of this. Can I ask you a quick question? How often has it gone beyond 5 years? Just on average, I mean, has it ever gone beyond 5 years?
Mr. Mayor, there were a few years after the national 2008-2009 recession that there were, and if I hope I'm not recollecting correctly, but I think there were 3 preliminary plats that went through an extension process. And although I sure can't find it in our ordinance or in the ordinances that we've adopted since then, I could have sworn that the city actually had this provision already in its subdivision code. And it may have been amended in 2009 or 10 when the Mr. Kerr, former city attorney, was accomplishing a series of code amendments to conform with state law regarding plat extensions and plat approval periods. So no, not often, but I did chat with a developer that has in hand a preliminary plat approval in the northwest corner of the existing Pasco city limits. And some of their, he did have a concern about the Northwest Sewer construction LID time period and his approval period, which expires in 2022. And he was asking this same question.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other questions from the council?
This is Councilmember Maloney. I just have one quick question for Mr. White.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
So, Mr. White, how does this play into or how does it interact with developer agreements or anything else that we may do, not just sale agreements, but also other sort of development agreements? Does this come into play at all, or is this kind of just two separate things? In my head, there's a nexus there, but I trust that you can help me work through that.
Well, actually, that's a real good question, because as we look forward to our urban area expansion, those are very likely to also involve a development agreement, which normally is good for a 10-year period with the option for mutual party extension upon agreement of whatever those terms may be. So actually, yes, it could involve development agreements, although that hasn't been the case yet.
So in those intersections, is there anything that this would preclude us being able to do in those developer agreements, or create any confusion with developers which one it falls under when they have to comply with something time-wise?
No, I don't believe so. Development agreements are generally written much more broadly and contain time periods that offer flex, I think, in that regard.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? If not, then we will look forward to seeing this whenever you're ready for council approval or not. But I think this is going to be important as we go on and get to develop our areas that you were discussing earlier, and look forward for that to come in our next meeting or regular meeting. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. All right, next we go to resolution, interlocal agreement with emergency management system. Mr. Chief Bob Gear, are you on the line tonight?
Chief Gear is not. Deputy Chief Dunbar is on. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Dunbar. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Thank you for having me. This is just a renewal of an interlocal agreement with Franklin County Emergency Management. Our current interlocal agreement expires at the end of this year. The new interlocal agreement would go from 2021 to 2028, and basically just extends what we've been doing through there. So there is a little bit of a fiscal impact in it, about $16,500 per year, that assists in Franklin County Emergency Management doing their part in their office, and pretty simple, just kind of working together with those guys over there. So unless Mr. Zabel has anything more, short and sweet on this one.
I don't have anything to add. The agreement maintains everything pretty much intact, just extends the date. And the annual assessment is a per capita assessment. Pasco is the biggest or the largest population in terms of the agencies participating. So even at that, it's a modest amount.
Right. But my understanding is that we actually are saving money by continuing this.
We would have to do these kind of services internally, as a department, which, I can't tell you off the top of my head how many FTEs is in Franklin County Emergency Management. I want to say 4 to 5.
There are 4 right now.
4. We'd have to stand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would have to stand that up, and we would have to, there'd be extra dollars associated with coordinating with other agencies that we're standing those up. So this is a great partnership, I think, with we have with the other municipalities in Franklin County, and it saves us all some dollars.
Perfect. All right, any questions or comments from council?
Thanks, Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had the pleasure of serving on as Pasco's council representative on the Franklin County Emergency Management Board for the last 3 years, and I can tell you they do a lot of work and they get in a lot of grants. A whole lot of the operating dollars and the expenditures made by that organization end up being money from the federal government. There's money from Hanford that comes in. There's a number of different sources, and they're doing I'd say a bang up job of being able to both make sure that good grant money is coming in and distributed throughout our community. So I know they've taken Franklin County Emergency Management, that that group has taken a very front role in our current fight against the pandemic. So that has really been, a lot of that work has been coming right out of their shop for the region. And so I strongly support us continuing this partnership and appreciate that. Not a whole lot of changes need to be made. This is a very good investment of dollars in my opinion. I think it will save us and generate additional grant money that's very significant and be difficult for us as a city to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Appreciate that comment and the confidence in this program here. So thank you for that. Anybody else? Well, thank you. We'll look forward to seeing that in the next regular meeting as well. So the next resolution is the sole source purchase for self-contained breathing apparatus purchase. Mr. Dunbar, do you want to give us a little insight on that, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor and council, appreciate it. Next thing on our list there is, this will be the sole source of purchase for the, what we call SCBAs, which is our air packs. We were actually awarded a FEMA Assistance for Firefighter grant earlier this year, and we went out and are working with our partners. The total grant funding from the federal government is $416,000, and then we have to match 10% of that. We actually are putting in about $57,000, which does the 10% match plus some other items that we need to purchase along with the SCBAs that we're replacing. So with that, we are maintaining through the sole source, and that's why we're requesting it to go to MSA, which are the same air packs that Kennewick, Richland, Benton One, several other agencies are also using. We're part of what we call the CWAG, Southeast Washington Air Group, who conducts maintenance and training on all the air packs. And in order to keep it together and be standardized across the area, that's why we're asking for the sole source of MSA. And with that, Ellen Curtis is the sole provider in Washington State, in fact, the whole West Coast for MSA, which is the reason we're doing the sole source for the purchase. So, and since it's over $300,000, that's what we're bringing to you. And of that, that'll replace 57 SCBA units, 110 masks. That way everybody has their individual mask. 114 bottles, which are the compressed air cylinders are actually supplies to air. And we're just asking for approval from the council to go forward with that sole source purchase.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar, and I can sure appreciate the grant funding and knowing that we're having the equipment that's going to keep our firefighters safe. Just a quick question. So if this gets replaced, what happens to the old equipment? Is it destroyed, or does it go to good use where needed throughout the country?
Yes, actually what we have is we have those 57 that we will replace. We'll keep a handful of them at our training facility to use on things that we know get beat up, but we will also excess a majority of them. I've already been in contact with 2 separate fire departments. One actually just in North Franklin County with Connell. We'll give them some after we excess them. There's also a brand new fire district up around the Northeast that one of our battalion chiefs is working on, and he's actually assisting them getting formed, and they've asked for help. So we would donate some to them. And then the other plan is to look at potentially giving them to the Colima group to work with us, those guys down there in Mexico as part of the partnership there. So yeah, we'd offer them up to local first, and then whatever we have left over, the plan is to see what we can do for Colima.
Appreciate that, Mr. Dunbar. Any other questions from council? All right, well, it sounds like a great deal and a good program. So, Mr. Dunbar, thank you. Look forward to seeing that in the next regular meeting as well.
Thank you, sir.
All right, next we'll go to, I believe it's another opportunity for you, Mr. Dunbar, is the resolution on the agreement with the Port of Pasco for the sewer main installation.
Yes, so what this is part of our overall construction projects that are going on that we have. One of them was to do some sewer hookup there by our training facility. And we worked together with the Port of Pasco to install the sewer main up through between our properties for some future development rather than just having us create a septic or something like that in the area. So we've actually teamed up with the Port of Pasco and had that sewer line installed that through the interlocal agreement that would help us actually allow for better development of the property there in the future. So it actually ended up saving a little bit of money, and that's where we're at in there. This one, I'm not quite as familiar with the other one, so if Mr. Zabel has anything to add on that one, I'll let him answer any questions if I can.
I would just add that the construction costs are pretty small. I want to say we're in the $60,000 range on a 50-50 split, and this requires an interlocal agreement with Pasco, Port of Pasco. An interlocal agreement, of course, requires approval by City Council.
Great.
So.
Any questions or comments by council? All right, if not, then we'll move forward and look for that at the next regular meeting as well. All right, next is the Resolution 2019 Annual Action Plan amendment for the use of Cdbg CV3 funds for COVID-19 response. Mr. Zabel, or would that go to?
Actually, that's Mr. White's going to walk us through that.
Okay, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council. I am unmuted. Okay. I just, again, the city has received additional COVID-related funding from HUD for CDBG purposes. And HUD has awarded Pasco an additional $414,000 to respond to the pandemic. Just as a very quick reminder, we have a very brief PowerPoint slide here, but I did want to remind council that CDBG, the annual action plan amendment is because of the amount of money received. So we have a plan in place, and HUD requires us to do this formal amendment with a formal public comment period. But the basis of the block grant program is to benefit low to moderate income families. So if we can just quickly go to the next slide, please. We have the $414,000 additional dollars we just recently received. Back in May, we received $434,000. So we have a cumulative total of almost $849,000. And we are removing approximately 20% for overhead and administrative costs from that amount. And then the next slide, please. Just a very quick rundown of the HUD requirements for the annual action plan amendment. Again, it's a substantial amendment. It's more than 10% of our previous year's allocation. Of course, we must have a definite nexus in fixing something caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. It does allow a shortened public comment period, which has already been advertised. And notably, the period of performance for this additional CDBG money is 3 years rather than the end of November for the CDBG CARES money. So we have up to 3 years to expend 80% or so of this allocation. HUD regulations also allow us to suspend the public service cap, which is limited to 15%. And of course, HUD requires policies and procedures to be in place to prevent duplication of benefits. Then the next slide, please. Just as a snapshot into where we currently are with our business assistant CDBG program that was designated for council approval roughly again in May. We had approximately, after the administrative overhead costs are removed, roughly $348,000 to disperse. To date, we've dispersed 9 of those grants for about $154,000 total. Council followed up by approving approximately $1 million for business assistance through the CARES program, which is of course separate from CDBG, although the funding source, federal government HUD, is the same. we've dispersed 23 grants from that pot of money for about $367,000. The Downtown Pasco Development Authority received a $125,000 grant from Group Health, and they've distributed and funded almost $112,000 in that source of funds for 14 separate business assistance loans. And then the next slide, please. Currently, through this program, we have about 145 applications that are not yet under formal review. We have approximately 24 that are under formal review and pending receipt of appropriate paperwork. Hopefully we can get that out. The focus has been to utilize the CARES money, that $1 million source of funds, because that has the November 30th timeframe. So obviously we're trying to use that up first, although the regulations are not any different anyway. So, but if we receive the paperwork that's necessary, we believe we can have an additional 24 grants out the door in fairly short order. And then the next slide, please. Franklin County is also processing a similar program through TriDeck. I believe that they've allocated $2.25 million for business assistance. Information from TriDeck just today identified 120 Pasco businesses in some form of process for that funding. Round 2 funding, which closed this past Friday, we have 60 or so applications. However, I do not have information yet on the number of Pasco businesses of that 60 that have applied, but I believe that can be obtained within a few days. Again, it just closed this past Friday. So what staff is proposing is that this second round of funding involve, again, the greatest flexibility that we can establish with the HUD program. And that is to establish emergency utility payment assistance, again, for low to moderate income families. We would propose that as a contingency, we have supplemental assistance for childcare, so to pay COVID-19 related costs for childcare. And again, thinking about that 3-year time frame for expending these funds, we would like to include public facility reopening costs, again, if they're focused on low to moderate income families and COVID related, as a contingency. So again, it's focused on establishing the most flexibility, and staff would recommend that council at least discuss the proposed focus of the additional $414,000, and as determined necessary or applicable, staff will bring the appropriate resolution back for council approval this next council meeting.
This is Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, Councilmember Alvarado, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question. I don't know if there's future slides or further slides with this. My question, I mean, I think it's obviously a good thing for us to get additional assistance for folks who have been affected. My question is, do we have perhaps something that's kind of a citizen's guide, or like a one-pager that has, you know, almost like a flow chart or something to let people know, here's the 5 things you need, or here's the documents you need, and then if yes, then here's the next step. Something that kind of makes it very easy for people to understand, like, I do qualify, I don't qualify. One of the consistent things we heard is that there's a lot of confusion about what does it mean to qualify, who cannot qualify, things of that nature. And then also, I'm just curious if there's if that information does exist, if it does exist in Spanish.
Well, yes, certainly, and thank you for asking that, because actually, Richard Sigdell, the finance director, and Mr. Zabel and I discussed some of those procedures that we need to have in place this morning. The business assistance grants do have those guidelines established, and assuming council approves the focus of the funding here, we will develop guidelines and appropriate checklists and information that does just that, Councilmember Alvarado. So you would have something that identifies you must have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to proceed. And if you do proceed, then you must have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we can process your formal application for a decision. And although I'll be candid, this is federal money, and so there are requirements that may seem confusing to people. And the focus of our discussion this morning was to try to come up with as many ways as we could for people to submit applications, whether it's in person, whether it's through paper, whether it's through some kind of internet or computer program. And the idea would be to make it simply as easy as possible. But that is a challenge. I'll be candid.
And any information on there being a bilingual option for this?
Oh, we can do that.
Okay.
Certainly.
And yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, federal, funds are, come with lots of strings attached. We know this, and but I think we're taking a substantial amount for administrative costs, and I think it'd be good to allocate some of that resource towards making it as straightforward as possible to folks who would benefit. I think there's a lot of barriers when it comes to, people just get overwhelmed, just doing their taxes sometimes. And so I think being able to have something that perhaps we can spend a little bit of dollars on kind of a visual design aspect that would make it a lot more understandable, that would, or whatever would help folks to not miss out on this and see this complicated thing as a barrier. I'd hate for that to be the case. Thank you very much.
Yep. I would definitely agree.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. I want to echo those sentiments as well. It does get a little bit overwhelming, but nevertheless, appreciate the work to be able to get our hands on these funds and provide them to our businesses and to help them out. Anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, this is Serrano. I appreciate what's been said so far. I also appreciate, Mr. White, these kind of contingency options. I think they're both valuable sources, in particular the public service childcare. I don't know if you're asking for a particular proportion. I don't have that offhand, but I do think, money needs to be granted to that, because we're going to have, and I'm sure we already have, dual income homes who are able to get back to work, but nowhere to send their kids with their school children.
Yeah.
And I certainly think that, if I recall, I believe the school district is looking at having a discussion on reopening tomorrow, if I recall the date correctly. So obviously we'll want to monitor that, how that progresses, but I don't see, full back to school till at least the beginning of the year. And I'm trying to read a city council tea leave for a school district, so I can't clearly. Nonetheless, I think that would be absolutely valuable. It does great things. It allows people to get back to work. It allows the child care providers to get back to work. So we're kind of benefiting the whole of the community. So I would love to see money allocated to that. And again, I don't know if you're asking for a portion, like a direct, you want to hear 10% from the council, or I don't know. I don't know what that number is.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. And no, we don't need a direct number, but we have been in discussions with 2 nonprofit groups that are doing exactly that. They're providing childcare, and they are very likely to need additional funding to support that childcare provision as the year wears on.
All right, well, thank you. So, Mr. White, so is one of the focus, what's the main focus here again? Because could we actually allocate some help and funding towards like people who are backed up on their utilities and things of that nature? And rent and things like that?
Yes, well, now, and again, and I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I neglected to mention this, but through the home consortium, we do have a $500,000 program in place administered through the city of Richland because they are the lead entity for providing rental assistance. So there is a program in place for that already that's separate from the two funding sources we've talked about tonight.
Okay.
So yes, the focus of this would be emergency assistance for utility payments, and as necessary, or if those funds can't be utilized for that purpose, then to provide either childcare or in some cases, refurbishing or remodeling of public facilities that have either been neglected or are lacking some kind of physical improvement as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. White. So it sounds like, is there any other comments from the council? Because to me, it sounds like we would like to see staff go ahead and pursue these resolutions and bring it to the council for adoption. Does anybody else have any comments or objections to that?
It's Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. White, can you talk me through a little bit? So the emergency assistance, I think, if I understood you correctly, that's talking about utilities, most specifically, utility payments. And then as contingency, we're talking about child care and then public facilities. Can you talk me through why we chose utilities as the primary and childcare as a contingency?
The utilities, and perhaps Ms. Sigdal can help me out with this. Actually, I might have those figures here now. The city expects a significant shortfall in utility payments as a result of citizens being out of work as a result of COVID. I believe that as of the end of September, we'll be out approximately $550,000. So if that isn't replaced in some manner, that would be a significant impact on the community. So the primary focus would be the utility repayment, knowing and recognizing that if a person falls anywhere from 2 to 3 to 5 to 6 months behind, it's going to be nearly impossible for them to catch up on utility payments. So this emergency provision would pay up to 3, possibly as much as 6 months of arrears utility payments. Since we had to amend the annual action plan, and since we've talked to nonprofits, we have decided to also include as a contingency the public service childcare and the public service reopening of buildings particular to childcare, because we don't want to have to come back and do this again.
So I guess, Mr. White, when I'm looking at our allocation of the other CARES funding we've been able to provide to the community, we're talking about a November 30th deadline, I believe, if I understood correctly, on the other CARES funding. Is that correct?
For the CARES Act, yes, that's correct.
And
in fact, if I could add, in fact, it's November 15th. This is Regis Adele, November 15th, in terms of submittal of our reimbursement to the state.
So what I was wondering, I guess where I'm going with this is we've only allocated a third of the funding. Mr. White, if I understood you earlier, we may be able to get another third spent. What happens with the final third if that clocks out? Does it simply disappear from our ability to spend? What's the outcome there?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, and Ms. Sigdal, please help, but my understanding is it needs to be returned to the Treasury.
That
That is correct. However, we have received, we have been collecting the cost of all of the COVID-related expenses for the city so far that have been incurred. However, the new allocation of $1.1 million, which is the second allocation for the local cares, was definitely something that was a nice surprise, but also a concern in that we had essentially a month to spend it, though not further out than that. As we all know, COVID is not going to end by November 15th, so we will have expenses related to COVID after that period as well. However, some good news that we received as of last Friday is that the Treasury Department is considering all of public safety related expenses to be eligible for reimbursement with local cares. So if there are any funds that are left over that we're not able to utilize as utility assistance or business assistance, or not be able to come up with specific line items in terms of COVID-related costs as of November 15th, we can go back and look at all of the public safety expenses. Like, for example, our ambulance department is definitely very highly impacted by COVID-19. So federal government is essentially stating at this point, as of last Friday, that we can utilize all of public safety payroll as a reimbursable expense for local cares. So at this point, I see very low chances of us having to give any of the funds back to state.
Well, that's certainly great news, and gets to the heart of a little bit of what I'm talking about here. If Ms. Sigdell, you're probably best to answer this question. If we had a deficit in our utility billing, would we ultimately need to cover that from the general funds and could allocate funds for that to cover that lost revenue?
Usually, yes, legally you can, but the best practice is to not do that. And the reason for that is that you have, one of the tenets of a full-service city is that you have something called the enterprise funds and you have something called the government funds. And your general fund, the services that are provided via general fund, like police, fire, and even ambulance, is a government activity. Whereas an enterprise fund is essentially a service that needs to be run as a business, and in fact has its own accounting standards that is different than some of our other government funds. So general fund is legally allowed to give funds to any other fund, and with council action we can do that. However, there's also a tenet of a service being able to support itself. These are definitely on different times, but it is preferred that the ratepayers who get the services from the utility are able to pay for the services that they're getting, rather than getting support from general fund.
And if I could jump in, Councilmember Maloney and Council, Ms. Sigdell's correct. The general fund can subsidize other funds. I think there's probably a little bit more to it in this case, in that you're asking you'd be asking the general fund to pay the bills of specific ratepayers. I think it's probably legal for them or for the general fund to subsidize across the board where each ratepayer benefited equally. But it may not be for certain ratepayers to benefit and other ratepayers not to benefit. So I'd like to have a conversation, not necessarily on the spot tonight, with the city attorney's office and kind of walk through that and be ready or prepared to answer that question next week. And prior to the end of the week, we can get council a legal opinion on that.
So I'll just make clear exactly where my brain's going on this one. I see that that emergency opportunities with the CARES Act funding, if we're unable to allocate it directly to people, the businesses or other people directly in Pasco, is that we end up covering deficits within our city expenditures. in a variety of fashions, ambulance fund, other things like that. This is good. It's good that we have this money available to do so. However, I believe the council has expressed in the past that we'd be willing to spend some of our rainy day fund, as it were, to make sure that the people of Pasco are made as whole as possible. So what I'm trying to figure out is if we're making the city more, whole and helping cover our additional expenditures for COVID with this money, which may be the best option for the CARES Act funding given the short timeline. Is there any way we can make sure to use more flexible money to have, over a longer period of time, benefit the people of Pasco more directly? I see the child care as a great, for instance, on being able to very much help people who are in desperate need right now. I was reading an article that was something like 50% of child care facilities across the state have closed because of the pandemic. So we're seeing a dramatic loss of this important function for our community because of this virus and the emergency we're in. So I want to make sure that we have an opportunity, that we're really thinking about how do we best allocate this money. Maybe whether that's contingency for this. I'm supportive of trying to use some of this fiscal reserve we have, the healthy state that the city of Pasco's in, prudently to help people as best we can. We're using this special funding sources to help who it can the best, and so that's what I'm trying to get at as I'm working through this. So, like Mr. Serrano said earlier, I think that the child care is is deeply important to given the age and demographics of the city of Pasco. That's a really essential one, and which is why I was kind of surprised to see it as contingency. So if there's any way we can finagle this to make sure that we're able to help the people of Pasco the best, that's what I'll be supportive of. And at the end of the day, I'm just glad we have the money and we can use it for something. Thank you.
If I could just add one more comment to that, because I think that's a really good point you're talking about, and utilizing the CARES Act for city activities that are eligible, at least the excess ones beyond those we can use for folks that meet the criteria and we can get out the door, as Director Sigdal mentioned, by mid-November. That'll actually leave more of a balance, obviously, in the city's reserves, because those dollars are already spent. And so if we can allocate some of those funds, if there are, to the extent that there are surplus funds, that's going to probably leave you more in your, what you call the rainy day fund. So that's part one. I think you're in using the surplus for use of those functions gets you halfway there. And then again, I think we need to talk a bit to the city attorney's office. Certainly, the rainy day fund would not have the November 15th or November 30th deadline on it. I mean, those are dollars that the council does have a little bit more flexibility, quite a bit more flexibility from when can you spend them standpoint. How can you spend them is the big question, and I think we need to talk a little bit about what kind of flexibility the council may have if there's an interest in the majority to pursue that. So we'll take a look at that question and be prepared to answer that as well.
All right.
I appreciate Mr. Zabel, you understanding exactly where I was going with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Anyone else? Okay, then I think we can move forward. Mr. White, and work on that resolution.
Thank you.
All right, thank you once again. So next we'll move right on to a very interesting topic here. The Automated Photo Enforcement Program Study results. Mr. Worley, are you on the line tonight?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and looking forward to see what you have to say. This is a very interesting topic here.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Tonight, we want to share with you some preliminary information that we have on the Automated Photo Enforcement Program Study. And as a brief background on this, I wanted to share with council that if they remember back in August of 2018, council authorized the use of electronic traffic enforcement at 2 intersections in the city, 20th Avenue and Court Street and Road 68 and Burden. Shortly after that, in about November of 2018, they executed, or the council authorized execution of the contract with a company called Redflex to provide all the equipment, the cameras and the software and everything that goes with it. So by the time spring of 2019 came around, the cameras were installed and they became fully operational in early summer of 2019. Initially, when the program got started up, there were warnings that were issued to violators, just kind of a nice way of saying, hey, these cameras are working now, and we want you all to be aware of it. And so in about mid-August of 2019, actual citations started being issued as a way to try to reduce the number of crashes at this intersection. Now, I want to point out that the purpose of the camera system, the automated photo enforcement, if council recalls, the reason for it was that it proved to be very difficult to try to get the police department officers out there to try to enforce red light running. And so council agreed that the cameras would be a good way to do that, to keep the officers safe and to keep the public safe from trying to do this. And the intent is to reduce the number of crashes at these 2 intersections. That's the total reason for doing this program. And so when the program started in mid-August 2019, we got a little bit of data. And then of course we know that in early 2020, COVID-19 hit and changed a lot of people's travel patterns. So the data is a little bit sketchy, but there is some data available. And from that data, we hired DKS and Associates to take a look at the data and give us an idea of whether the cameras were doing what they were intended to do. So tonight, we have Brian Chandler from DKS here to go over the results of the preliminary information that we have so far. So feel free to answer any questions either during the presentation or afterwards, and then I'll finish up after Brian is done as well. So with that, Brian, you want to go ahead and get started?
All right, thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all again. Just a quick check, is my audio okay, Steve?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Very good. So we will we'll jump right in. Yeah, next slide, please. So Steve mentioned we'll just talk very briefly today, just a few slides about the study purpose, the findings of the study, and conclusions and next steps. Next slide. The purpose, again, Steve kind of mentioned this, is just to get a first look at the effectiveness. As mentioned, the program's only been up for a few months, but we wanted to give you the information as we have it now. Next slide. Also as mentioned, we have automated enforcement at 2 different intersections in the city, one at North 68 and North Road 68, sorry, and Burden Boulevard, and one at 20th Avenue and Court. And also, as mentioned, the citations have been given since mid-August of 2019. This is just one example. You can see there the two circled items there. You can see a warning sign that's required, letting people know that this intersection is enforced with photo enforcement. And then also the other circle, maybe a little harder to see, is the actual device itself that takes the photo and then provides that information to Redflex, who then handles the processing. Next step. Thank you. So preliminary evaluation of effectiveness, to kind of give you the last page first, is we've seen, we wanted to look at reducing frequency of red light violations and also to improve intersection safety. One thing that we've seen in the broader research of locations nationally that have done a lot of these, this is not a new treatment. We've been using this for 25 years. And those 2 items correlate significantly. We see a reduction in angle crashes whenever we see a reduction in red light running violations. A couple of study limitations, again, as Steve had alluded to there. We do have 10 months of after data on the citations, but that does include the COVID-19 period. And then we only have 4 months of after data for crashes. So we didn't have data after December 2019 that was at a level that I felt comfortable with looking at. And that's kind of a next step, is to potentially be looking at additional months of crash data. Next slide. And next slide. So this is one example, just to give you, we did an analysis looking at citations using the data from the vendor at each of the 4 different setups. So each location has 2 setups. This is the northbound at 68 and Burden, as you can see from the figure captioned below. And this is the number of citations sent out from the system. So the system identifies a lot of things. It actually cuts out a lot of what it initially sees and then eventually landed on, in September of 2019, 135 citations. I started with September because August was only a partial month and it would have made the data look a little weird. So it just gives us a full month to start with. And you can see there was a clear downward trend from September through February 2020, which is even pre-COVID. So that none of that, you can see that trend line there going from September to February. That does not include any COVID issues. And then you can see it kind of stayed low, and then it did come back up into the summer. And this is something that often happens for a number of reasons. One, traffic volumes tend to come up in the summer months in a number of locations. We know that in Pasco specifically, that volumes were way down at the beginning of COVID and then have come back up over the summer, like they have kind of everywhere else in the state and even in the country. The other reason that we tend to see this kind of initial significant drop and then it coming back with things like automated enforcement is that you do tend to have that initial push of, oh, this is a new thing, it's on the news, people are talking about it. I have a friend that maybe got their first automated enforcement citation, and so I've heard about that. It's kind of in the discussion. There's maybe a news article about it. And then when that goes away, like any enforcement efforts, you tend to see things come back up. Now, one thing you see here is it didn't come back up near to the level of September, and you're going to see at the other locations that kind of, it's a very similar pattern, but the coming back up came back even lower. And so go ahead and go to the next slide. This is that same graph. The top left one is the one you just saw, and then go ahead and click. Sorry, I forgot that I had done this as a perfect. And then this is actually the other 3 systems that are set up. So the graphic you see in the top right, this is the other location at 68 and Burden. You can see it has a similar pattern, but in this case, starting at over 300 citations a month, and then only coming back up to 150. You can see at 20th and Court, southbound, again, a similar pattern. Maybe not quite as clear to see there, but you still had that downward trend, and then coming back up just a little bit. And then 20th and Court westbound has a little bit of anomaly. I think we could never get this confirmed, but I think that there were some issues with the system itself in the first couple months, and it wasn't until November that they had that fully operational, because that September and October numbers are very low. And you can see the rest of that follows the similar pattern that we've seen at the other location. So remembering, this is looking at the number of citations, so the actual tickets that were given out by the system to red light runners. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I had a circle there. Just to point that out. Yeah, that's fine. We can go right here. That was just pointing out that little anomaly at the beginning at that one direction. The other thing, just 2 slides here, taking a look at intersection crashes. One of the important things that Steve had mentioned was that the purpose of this system isn't to generate income or to generate tickets. The intent of this, the goal, is to reduce or even eliminate red light running. And the goal of limiting red light running is to reduce crashes and improve safety at these 2 intersections. And so the information we have is very minimal. I kind of did the best with what we had right now. I do recommend that we take a look at more after data. That, of course, is going to be weird because of COVID. The data is going to be kind of difficult to analyze in everything related to traffic safety, and frankly, in everything related to transportation over the next couple of years because of COVID. But we have what we have, so we're going to use what we have. And what we do have is at 68 and Burden, at that intersection, there were an average of 25 crashes per year at that location overall over the past 5 years from 2014 to 2018. At that same location, just looking at that September to December data, so just 4 months of data, by doing a little bit of math, which again, we're using a very small data set, you can see there the annual average is less than that, so from 25 to 18. So we are seeing the average crash frequency per year One of them normalized by dividing by 5 years, one of them normalized by taking those 4 months and multiplying by 3 to get a full year's worth of average crashes. You can see a reduction. If you go to the next slide, exact same math. At this location at 20th and Court, we averaged about 11.6 crashes per year at that location at the intersection for the 5-year period before the system went in. And then looking again just at that 4-month period from September to December, there were only a couple crashes. And so the average there is, in this case, seeing a reduction of about half the number of crashes per year. Again, doing a little bit of tricky math right now. I mean, it's not tricky, it's simple math. But because we don't have the kind of data that we need to do a more robust study. But the most important part here, and go ahead and go to the next slide. The most important message for this, yeah, go ahead, yeah, is that really the safety has improved. We have early indications to show that there's a potential reduction in intersection crashes. That was the point of this system of trying this out. My opinion is that it is working, and I'd recommend that you continue what you're doing. And particularly because your red light running has reduced, and that's significant. I mean, the goal here again is to reduce the frequency of red light running violators so that you reduce that opportunity or that chance of having those angle crashes because of those red light violations. Next slide. And so my recommendations for next step is just to continue monitoring, really tracking through this winter. There are some seasonal impacts of volumes that go up and down. Crashes tend to go up in the summer. So keeping an eye on those. Obviously, the COVID-19 recovery is going to affect the traffic patterns, and more after data, looking at more data, both in terms of citations and crash history, is going to help solidify these results. And then just reanalyzing later as we have additional crash data to look at. So we really do need more data to confirm the crash part of this analysis. Next slide. Yeah, with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you for that presentation. Council, I'd like to give you an opportunity. Do you have any questions for Brian?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, Councilmember Alvarado, go ahead.
Just curious into the data. Had you, obviously we only have part of the year, and I'm wondering if we were able to. I mean, I don't know if it's needed, but because that data does not cover summer for the previous 5 years, if we would do that same math of those winter years times 3 for each of those years, I'm just not sure if we're comparing apples and oranges, if it's just the winter months that we're measuring versus perhaps if we did that November to whatever that date was times 3 for the other 5 years, if that would give us similar results. I'm often looking at data like that. My second question is how easy or how easy is it to get data from Redflex? Do they charge us for sending us an Excel sheet, or I'm just curious how friendly it is. I've contracted services that it should be a really easy Excel sheet, but they make it very difficult so that you have to hire consultants to be able to analyze data. That should be pretty simple to analyze. So I'm just curious how Redflex is friendly to us being able to just say, okay, we need a report, and here we can just filter things and just make it a very easy Excel function for our professionals. So just curious about that.
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. Redflex has actually been pretty great. I don't know in terms of just saying, hey, give us the data, but what they did do is they gave us full access to their system. So now either you all or we as your consultant can go into that system anytime, and we get direct access even to the live data. So we can look, at last week's data and see if that has changed as COVID continues, as we continue to recover, we can look at that. So that's been, in terms of something very easy that you can just go look at and get the answers that I gave you in this presentation on a weekly basis, that's not quite as easy, but still not too difficult. I mean, we had to kind of figure a few things out and ask them some questions, but now that we've kind of gotten into the data, it would be relatively easy for us to update what we've already done. That would not take too much effort. On your first question about the data, Yeah, this crash data analysis, frankly, it's very difficult. There were literally 2 crashes at the Court and 20th location between September and December. Anytime we're looking at crash data that low, it kind of doesn't matter how you slice and dice it. There's so much anomaly. There's so much, the statistics just don't, there's no statistical stuff you can do that's going to be really any good. So yes, to your question, we definitely could have just looked at September through December of the last 5 years. I think that'd be a fine idea to take a look at that. And maybe that would have shown that the crashes are about the same and not reduced. It's so hard, especially with COVID. We don't have a summer yet where we've had no COVID and we've had this automated enforcement system in to see what kind of impact it's going to have to reducing that red light running. We probably won't see that, especially, sitting in on the rest of the meeting this evening. We probably won't see that until at least 22, if not 23. So it's going to be tough to have a real feel for it. What I would recommend is, I don't know the details on the financials of the system, but my opinion is it's doing what you set out for it to do, which is to improve safety at these locations. I'm convinced that what it's doing is you are heading in the right direction. I think it is going to be very important to continue to look at that data and see if that trend that's come back up, if that flatlines. And if you flatline at half the red light running citations that you had back in September, October, that's fantastic. I think you've done a great job. Then there could be some other things you could do to try to address those other ones. If you see it to start to come up again in the summer or as traffic comes back, I think that's another thing to look at. And maybe it's not the only solution. Maybe there's other things that need to be considered too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate being able to look at data, and I look forward to in the future to be able to have a little bit more confidence in just being able to say, yes, it is definitely working, and we've considered different factors. So I do appreciate being able to get an update at this point. I was just yesterday I was in 68 and I saw the red light in action when someone did a late after yellow running of the red light. It was like inching towards the yellow, and it wasn't me, but I did see that, and it's doing its thing. So thank you for the report.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Anybody else?
This is Serrano. I'd like to thank Councilman Alvarado for asking some of the questions that I already had, in particular the one about kind of extrapolating apples to apples in the month period. I'll be very interested to see, especially if we're kind of on a rebound from COVID, to see what the spring and summer look like. I guess I raise that as kind of both cautionary and interest, because in looking back at our agreement, it's a 3-year term with 2 automatic renewals, and the term commenced in November of 18. So if council is not seeing that this is doing, if it doesn't continue this trend of positive, I guess, enforcement, or however you want to term this, we'll need this presentation around this same time. Actually, it's a 30-day notice, so probably as early October of next year. So I'd like to raise that as kind of a cautionary tale to staff. Maybe mark it for the end of September, early October, so that gives us enough of the 30 days prior to, I think it was November 18th. And that would allow us to fulfill the full 3-year term without an early breach, in the event not seeing things continually trend. But I do appreciate this because it's tough. We have partial years, we have COVID, and it's really hard to tell, but it's certainly, I appreciate your analysis that it seems like it's trending to do what we've asked the system to do, which is result in safer traffic patterns in these 2 intersections. So I'll be very interested to see if, again, especially if we're in a post-COVID world where more people are out on the street, to see whether or not it actually is performing its function. So again, I guess I just, I echo Councilman Alvarado's questions and thoughts, and I appreciate what you've provided to us, but kind of laying the foundation for, if we're not seeing it trend properly, we may want to consider this about, whether or not we want to renew.
Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. I would actually be interested, and I don't know how possible this is, but of the 2 accidents that occurred, and then obviously that was just for the short period, and adding an estimated amount for the rest of the year, I would actually like to be to know, the severity of the accidents, if there's any fatalities, things of that nature. Is that possible?
We can determine whether those are injury accidents or not.
Yeah, that would be helpful to me as well, if it's not too much problem, in reviewing this. That it is trending to seem that it's going in the right direction, and it's obvious. I know many people who will avoid those intersections now because of it. But at the same time, want to make sure that that we're doing right with our citizens, and for me, it's about saving lives and not injuring people. And if we can show that, like, I was reluctant to get this program in, but I'm open, obviously, to having a safer environment out there and a safer driving conditions. So I'd be interested to know the severity of the accidents that occur at that place compared to what it was before.
We can follow up with a quick memo to council on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
This is Councilmember Maloney. Just real quick, Mr. Worley, when these are implemented in other areas, in other cities and such, I imagine that there's that trail off effect of like, oh, it's on the news, everyone knows about it. I think that was mentioned earlier by the speaker. And what I was just curious about is, is there any sort of public awareness campaign that we should refresh periodically? Again, this is about saving lives, not collecting money. So if we can remind people, hey, don't run the red light in the first place, if there's any way we can amplify it other than just issuing citations, I'd be very interested in that. Slightly separate conversation, but if there's one way we can keep up the public pressure to drive this down, that's the same result to me. We're saving lives and stopping violations. So appreciate that in the future. If just any thoughts you might have on that.
Thank you, Councilmember.
The only thought I would have is that I have not seen it in other places. I've been in one other community where they had it, and city manager Zabel is aware of that community as well. So he was there longer. He may have more information about it, but I think we could certainly do that in terms of getting information out on our social media about the enforcement that are there. Just because the purpose of it, again, is to reduce the crashes and improve the safety. And with that, you might have noticed that in the agenda report, there's information about the money that has been collected. And based on the revenues from the citations and the expenses that are required as part of our agreement with Red Flex, you can see as of about the end of September of this year, there's a net revenue of $96,000. And the agreement that we had going to council with this was that any revenues that are collected would go towards safety improvement projects. And $96,000 is a good chunk of money. It's not a lot to do a whole lot of improvements, but it may be helpful to go towards a match related to another safety grant that we could use that might be able to help either these two intersections or other areas within the city as well. So it's good that we're covering our expenses. There's a little bit extra that may be able to help us do a project here or there in the next year or two. So be happy to answer any other questions, or if City Manager Zabel wanted to add anything else to your comment earlier.
Yeah, I could, to your point, Councilmember Maloney, I think having now this first data report, even though it maybe not provide the level of detail or the robustness that we'd like for a lot of different reasons, time and COVID impacts and so forth. But I think that gives us an opportunity, as well as Director Worley's comment about what's going to happen with any excess from the program, to maybe package something that we can get out to folks that, one, reminds them of the existence of the safety cameras at these two intersections. Two, what our experience has been so far in making in what appears to be making those intersections safer. And then three, assuring the public that any excess, which is about $90,000, as Mr. Worley mentioned, would be used for traffic safety. And maybe at the point we identify what that might be, that it's going towards another grant, or it's going for some localized improvements someplace, Those are some things we can get a little mileage out of and then use also to remind the public of the existence of the cameras and to be careful driving through those intersections, because you're absolutely correct. The point of this is not to collect tickets for failure to stop at a red light. The point of this is to make the intersection safe and reduce accidents.
Thank you, Mr. Zabel. All right, well, thank you for that report. We'll move right along. Mr. Brian and Mr. Wardy, thank you. Thank you once again. We'll move right along to the next item. And the last item on the agenda is for the Downtown Master Plan and Sign Code Update. Mr. White, would you like to take the lead on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, and a little bit of a different tone for this subject. It's a bit softer than the red light camera issue, but this is a follow-up from council discussion of just a few short weeks ago, in which the mural regulation in downtown Pasco was discussed. And I think as council is well aware of by now, murals, well, actually murals and all other signage is regulated the same in Pasco, no matter where you're located. So the downtown signage regulations are the same as the Court Street regulations, Road 68 regulations, and looking ahead, they would be the same in Broadmoor if that were adopted and developing today. So I wanted to bring to council's attentions that there are 3 distinct processes occurring right now. The first of those, which is underway, which is actually about halfway done, is the sign code update, where a specialized consultant has taken a look at Pasco's sign code, which was adopted in 2006, and has suggested a number of revisions that make it readable, more organized, and easier to understand for, frankly, both staff and for citizens, because right now it is not easy to understand, nor is it consistent in its regulations and their application. The second process will be proposed for the 21-22 budget that identifies a downtown master plan for downtown Pasco, in which a number of issues will be examined. We would anticipate that murals will be kind of leapfrogged into that process so that we can coordinate a downtown master plan effort with signage and with land use and with physical inventories associated with what kinds of things we want to see achieved downtown. And then the third process, which I think is just beginning, is our newly appointed Arts Commission, which staff would at least recommend that they get a chance to develop a more comprehensive public art policy for City Council's consideration. The current definition of murals in our sign code includes the ability to provide both commercial and non-commercial messages. I would anticipate that that is very likely to be the case when the sign code regulations are proposed for council consideration. And given that, there's a juggling that's going to occur between the downtown master plan, the sign code update, and the Arts Commission proposal for public art policy within the city of Pasco. The anticipated timeline for this to occur is roughly midsummer. The academic exercise of examining the organization and hierarchy of the sign code is proceeding to the Planning Commission. Actually, this Thursday, they'll get their first view of the consultant's analysis, and we expect that very early in 2021, we'll develop a subcommittee for developing regulations for both the Planning Commission and council consideration for actual sign code updates. However, I want to make sure council understands that we're in effect looking forward to taking the mural piece at least and moving that up in the scale so that it can be considered in conjunction should the downtown master plan and arts policy by the Arts Commission be a better fit in terms of coordination. So I wanted to throw that out there, and would appreciate council discussion on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. White. Council, any comments or questions?
So this is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Mr. White, when we discussed this most recently in our council meeting, one of the things I had encouraged was, is there any way we can move any low-hanging fruit up that's gone through the theoretical exercise, the academic exercise? Is there any of that we might be able to get pulled forward? I understand that will be presented to Planning Commission, and I hope that the Planning Commissioners will have some feedback and input on that very topic. I would ask that you please try to prompt them to identify some spots where they think that there could be some low impact to long-term planning and the possibility of any need or any potential future non-compliances that might be created by relaxing a standard now that may be more stringent next year or something like that. But again, especially in our downtown corridor, we've got a lot of business owners who are pretty frustrated right now with the city and the city's enforcement of things, not just murals, but we're talking about, things like sandwich boards or decals on windows and such. So I would encourage, if there's some things that we can identify as low-hanging fruit, I would encourage that maybe our planning commission discuss it and see if we can get something cranked out, and actually implemented, sooner than sometime next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Anybody else? Well, I think this will be a wonderful thing once we get this nailed down. I think it is very important. I think there is a lot of frustration, and this is a long time awaiting for us to to put this in an easier, more understandable way to enforce in the city and make it more clear for everybody to understand. So I would say, Mr. White, if there's no further comments from the council, to continue.
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
I think as we consider this, I just ask that as we look at different zoning, different places where we're discussing murals, let's be considerate of the amount of money that we're going to spend on improvements. For example, we already have certain monies allocated towards Peanuts Park, and we want to ensure that whatever mural exists coincides with some of the design features that the city is going to expend our resources on. So I don't know how other than generically to state that, but I hope that kind of drives a baseline message, Mr. White, that I don't know, again, whether we can even effectively zone it in that manner, but let's just be considerate of, we've got taxpayer resources going into certain places and continue, where we can beautify things through murals, or where a mural may not actually coincide with what we're doing. Let's be careful of that.
Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. I can appreciate that. You can take that into consideration, Mr. White, please. Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, council, for your comments, and Mr. White for that. Hopefully we can move forward and get this improved, much more improved for the future. So thank you very much. Next, we'll go to item number 6, miscellaneous council discussion. Mr. Zabel, do you want to lead that off, please?
I just did have a few things, Mr. Mayor. One, to alert council that Director Ratkine and I will be addressing the Kennewick City Council this week to give them an update on the animal control shelter project, and the Richland City Council the following week. And then we'll be providing a similar presentation, plus what information we learned from those two presentations to our council, I believe on the 26th. Yes, that sounds about right. Yep. Right. So just that seems to be moving along, and I think you're going to be excited about what we've been able to develop over the last few months. Employee recognition banquet. I know it's kind of early to be talking about that. That's typically in January, and I throw it out there only given where we're at with COVID. We're probably all going to have to get used to the idea that might run a little bit later into the year. So I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not quite sure where that's going to be. Typically, we start planning at this point in time is why it kind of came up. And that's most likely not going to happen in January, based on what we're hearing. Next, Bdi Rate Increase. We did receive a letter per their contract just recently. They're looking at an increase of about 1.56% is what they're proposing. And typically what's happened is the council's established a bit of a subcommittee to evaluate their calculations and assumptions that they made in their rate increase. There's a number of components in the contract that we look at, or they're allowed to consider in their rate increase, their rate adjustments. And would like to know if there's any, if council wants to continue that, and if there's a couple of council members that may be interested in sitting on a subcommittee, we can work around that. It's typically just with staff and the two council members that have been on it, and a representative or two from BDI. And with the virtual meeting, it makes it a little bit easier than perhaps years past in terms of coordination.
Absolutely. So I know in the past, Councilmember Alvarado. Yes, in the past, Councilmember Alvarado, you've been involved, so we'd like to give you the first opportunity. And are you okay with continuing on that committee?
Yes, absolutely. That'd be great. I think last year we included the finance director, and she was as well, but she did a little bit more of a heavy lift to help us with the data analysis and making sure that their secret sauce formulas were on point with what we understood. And so that was very helpful. And so I would love to see that again. But yeah, I would love to help with as much as I can.
Wonderful. Is anybody else, give an opportunity for someone else to be on that committee? Going once?
Don't everybody jump at it at once. I guess I will, since I haven't had experience with this in the past. It might be a good learning opportunity for me.
Okay, I appreciate that, Councilwoman Roach. I was gonna step up, but I wanted to give somebody else an opportunity. I kind of got my plate a little full right now, but thank you for volunteering, and Councilwoman Roach would participate in that subcommittee.
Appreciate the help, and we'll have basically the staff we had last year, myself, Public Works Director, and Finance Director. So,
okay.
And then one other item, I just wanted to give council a couple numbers on our COVID test site. Over the weekend, we tested 207 on Saturday and 134 on Sunday. So those numbers are continuing to come in pretty well on the weekends, as well as the 3 weekdays that we are open. The other piece of information I did want to share with council, last Friday, I had the opportunity to hear from Sean Davis, the Franklin County Emergency Management Director, and he had reported that initially there was a bit of a drop-off at the National Guard site, but those numbers are up now too. And so not only is the site being run by city and the contractor doing pretty well, about 500 plus tests a week right now. National Guard site's doing really well too. So we're seeing a lot more testing going on in the Tri-Cities over the past couple of weeks than we've seen previously. So that's exciting news for us.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all I had.
Yes, and again, to trailer on that or piggyback on that, again, I want to encourage the community. The health district wants to encourage those who feel they have symptoms to go in and test. This is not official, and I'm just suggesting that, again, if you're going to go visit somebody with underlying health issues, if you're going to spend time with them, if you've been in places where it's questionable, you know, I've been in situations working out at Hanford where you just never know who has been infected. And sometimes it's a little too late. So, again, just be cautious, be aware of your surroundings, continue to social distance, and in the event that you're unsure, and you know, don't confuse allergies with COVID. Just go get tested. I would highly advise that, and just want to encourage everybody to keep testing. It helps everybody, and it reduces the opportunity for infection to other people. So Thank you for that. Is that it, Mr. Zabel? Anybody else of the council would like to share anything on miscellaneous discussions?
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilmember Roach, and I just want to say about the testing site. I went there on Thursday morning with my kids and I because one of my kids, sorry about that, had symptoms. And they did such a professional job, and they were efficient, they were quick. We all tested negative, but it was exactly what you just described. We had cold symptoms, and we want to protect both sets of grandparents that we have. So we didn't hesitate. We just went in and they took care of us really quickly and very friendly. So we got the results in less than 72 hours. And, you know, I can tell you that that peace of mind was really great to have, and to be able to tell grandparents, nope, just a cold, but we want to be as careful as possible.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. Okay, thank you for that. Next, we'll, item number 7, Mr. Zabel, do we have a need for an executive session tonight?
None this evening.
Wonderful. So with that, council, thank you for your time and energy and all your participation, and for all those who presented tonight. We look forward to seeing everybody again next week. Have a great week. Have a safe week. And this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.